Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for yet another episode of the Industry Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Maria Birova, Clean Health Master Coach and WBFF Pro. Today, we're going to be talking about all things nutrition with Stefan Ianev, who is the Head of Research and Development here at Clean Health. And more specifically about nutrition, we're going to be talking about the Level 3 Performance Nutrition Certification offered through Clean Health. So hopefully you'll have all of your questions answered about that. And hopefully you consider taking that level 3, especially if you have looked at or have taken level 1 and 2 already. But without further hesitation, let's bring Stefan on in and start this episode. Nice to finally meet you. I know I've been on the team for a while, but we've kind of always crossed paths with scheduling lives and podcasts. But I'm excited to have you on this season of the podcast. I'm the only host, so Dane isn't with us anymore with the podcast. But we're gonna dive right into it. So we're gonna start off the podcast episode talking more about introducing you and who you are. I did a little intro for you at the beginning, but give us a little bit more about the way you've progressed in the career of fitness.
Okay, so when I got out of school, I actually went down the path of engineering. So I come from a very academic background. My parents like engineers, architects, and I sort of got pushed down that pathway. You could probably understand. And so I did for one semester, and the thing is, I flunked all my exams, and as I was meant to be studying for my uni exams, I was reading about muscle fiber types and different training methods and stuff like that. So after that first semester in uni, I realized this actually wasn't for me. And then my heart and passion was in training. And I'm lucky that my parents, they understood that. They actually supported it. So I transferred from doing the engineering to doing the fitness course. And it kind of started from there. So I think when you have a passion for something, it's a lot easier for you to learn it. And I started with my Cert 3, Cert 4 in fitness, which is the minimal level of qualification here in Australia that you need to operate as a trainer. After doing that, I kind of realized it wasn't enough for me. Like I knew a little bit, but I didn't know enough. So then I went to uni, I did my bachelor's. And even then I felt like it wasn't really enough. So I went to did my master's. Awesome. And it was funny because when I was at uni, what I realized was I had an advantage in a way because I had been in the industry for a couple of years. I had got a chance to practice different methods and put the theory into practice. So when it came to, I'm not sure if you know how uni works, but you learn all the theory first, and then you go into practical. And sometimes that can be hard to learn that way because you're learning all this theory and you don't know how you're going to be applying it. I came from the other way. I was already applying a lot of theory and I wanted to know why it works. So I did really well in uni. I got straight distinctions for all my classes. I didn't even take notes. Like the students used to laugh at me because I wouldn't take notes in class, but I would laugh back at them because, I would cover their page and say, okay, well, if you just took so much in of what just happened, you tell me what exactly the teacher just said. And oftentimes they won't be able to repeat it. And when they ask me, I would say, well, he said this, and that. And they're like, well, how do you know that?
What he means by saying this and that.
Remember. And the thing is, I could relate to it because I had already been practicing this. So when he's talking about the different theory and biochemistry and physics and all that stuff, so mine was an applied course as well, so it was relevant. To me, it was really interesting, and I took it in really well. So for me, learning that way worked really well. So I did my my master's degree. Then I got serious. Once I got out of that, I got really serious about my business. I stepped up my game. I did Poliquin courses. Did Lane Norton, Milos Sarcev, all these other guys. I did courses with them because the uni is good. You learn foundation, you learn how to interpret research, but it's a bit low on the practical side of things. You don't really learn. And a lot of these kids that come out of uni and still really don't know what to do. So then I just kept going, kept learning from these guys. And then next thing you know, I found myself teaching alongside of them and then teaching trainers. So that's what kind of brings me where I am today.
You bring up a good point, being, just in the industry I've been coaching for about 5 years now. And each and every year, I feel like I'm learning more and more through practice as well. I took endless amount of certifications. I continue to do workshops with other industry leaders. Milos Sarcev, I've taken some of his, supplemental seminar courses before too. And those are the type of things that can really elevate your toolkit, but you also learn a lot by using the tools, right? And experimenting on when to use what tool on what client, which is the art of coaching. And you get that with the experience of actually doing it and applying.
And I'm finding, yeah, the average coach these days, at least the coaches that I tend to associate and be around, is very high level compared to when I first got in the industry, you know. Because you could come into the industry when I first got in and attend a certification, and someone could make pretty outlandish claims with no real backing of what they were saying. And, you know, they could reference obscure French studies and things like that and get away with it. These days, you can't do that. The trainers are just so clued in. They're quite well read up. Even Gen Pop clients are pretty clued in these days.
Which is a good process.
So you just can't
Now, what would you...
Which makes the trainer's job harder, but it pushes you to stay ahead. You know, you got to stay that one level ahead of your clients. And then if you're teaching trainers, you got to stay one level ahead of them. So it kind of never ends.
What would you say has been one of your greatest milestones in your career in the fitness industry so far?
Look, I've had a few. I think getting my master's degree would probably be the first thing, and then, you know, when I was reading guys like Charles and Lane Norton and Christian Tibito, that I never thought one day I would actually know these guys on a personal level, you know, and chat to them and exchange ideas with them and even go alongside and teach with them. So I'd say that was a really big milestone, having the opportunity to do that. Having the opportunity to teach thousands of trainers around the world and travel to like over a dozen continents around the world teaching. That was big. And then, you know, winning a bodybuilding contest, several of them, that was a big accomplishment. Having clients winning shows and pro cards, that was a big accomplishment. So I've had a few things that, you know, that I'm proud about in my career.
Endless amounts of things laying in your future that are going to add to that list of accomplishments.
Yeah, look, these days, to be honest, I don't get as caught up in chasing personal accolades. It doesn't really drive me all that much. It's more about just the fulfillment of what I can learn and what I can contribute. I kind of got past that, you know, that stage of, I think I can thank Tony Robbins for that and doing some of his seminars.
Oh, interesting.
At first, you know, we all sort of get into it for our own personal success and what the joy that brings us. But after a while, you sort of do get over that. And these days, like I said, I still want to just contribute to the field. I just want to learn as much as I can, but it's just for my own personal fulfillment more than anything else.
That's awesome. That's true passion behind your purpose of doing what you're doing, which is amazing. And, you know,
absolutely. I think, and that's the only way I think you're going to succeed is if that's the place that you come
from a place of passion.
If you weren't getting paid, and you're like, if you weren't getting paid, what would you be doing?
Right. I ask myself that question all the time. And, you know, it's when starting so young, I actually started PTing. And for our listeners who have listened before know that I started being a PT while I was still in school. And I was in school to be a nurse, you know, like, and then completely 180 turned into a business degree, turned into me focusing on being a PT. And it was because of that time. I wasn't making much money doing it, but I just loved helping other people. And who knew that like taking those leaps towards that direction and following that passion would lead to a successful career where I'm able to financially support myself with my passion.
I think there was a study on that actually they did a couple of years back. They took a group of students and they followed them 30 years later.
Oh.
And what they did is they looked at which of the ones selected a career that they thought would be more fulfilling to them versus those ones that selected a career that would be more financially rewarding to them, you know, like finance or something like that. And what was funny is 95% of that group, the ones that had become millionaires, were the ones that went and pursued their passion, not what they thought would be more financially secure. So when you follow your passion, wholeheartedly, it always seems to reward you financially at the end, one way or another.
That's like the key advice, regardless what field, what career, just trust that you're allowed to be able to do what you love. And don't be afraid of it because you think the money value of it or the success rate, whatever it may be, just keep taking steps towards that and you can be successful with your passion. Now, let's talk about your philosophy on education and how you believe a PT should be investing in their education and what would be the starting steps for a PT? Let's say if they're out of school, right, and they don't go to the route of education through uni, what would be your recommendations for leveling up your education?
So I definitely think education is very important. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this space. And I have my background speaks for that too. I think uni is a good pathway, but it's not
Yeah.
for everyone. And as I said, if you do want to go down the path of educating other trainers or research, then it's almost a must. Then you need to have a higher level of qualification. You need to understand research, physiology on a deeper level. Now, if you just want to be the best trainer that you can be, and it may not be necessary for you to go down that route. And a lot of the stuff I'd say in the last decade, that knowledge that I've acquired hasn't come through uni. And to be honest, I've forgotten probably half of what I learned in uni, like a lot of the physiology, pathways, all that. But whatever's relevant to me that I've needed to learn, I've always brushed up on. These days, knowledge and information is just so readily available. You can just open PubMed and pretty much search anything. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I still have access to my uni professor. I'm very close with him, Dr. Daniel Hackett. So whenever I need any access to any papers that are not freely available, he'll send them over to me. So that is a plus. But a lot of the stuff is freely available, and it's not expensive if you want to sign up and just get access for a couple of days to a paper. So the information is there if you're willing to take the time and go through it and read it. The problem is as well, though, information by itself is actually not that valuable. And the reason that is because there's so much of it. There's actually no shortage of it. You get bombarded with it from everywhere. And that can create a lot of confusion with trainers. It can cause paralysis, by analysis when you know too much and you don't know how to apply it. So, I think one of the things that really separates our courses from the other courses I see out there, the clean health courses, because there's a lot of really good people in the industry that have a lot of good information, and they're all for, debunking this and debunking that. And that's great. Okay. But where does that leave you as a trainer with what do you do? You know what I mean? If this works and that works, and, just do whatever you prefer. It's personal preference, The problem with that shit, when you're very vague with your recommendations, it creates a lot of confusion for the trainer because they really don't know where to start. And then also for the client too, if you say that to your client, eat what you want, score your personal preference, that creates a lot of confusion for them, because the more decisions we need to make on a day-to-day basis, especially trivial decisions about what we're going to eat, what we're going to wear, things like that, that occupies energy in your mind. And that starts to lead to decision fatigue and eventually start making poor choices. So you need systems. There's value, like I said, not in information, but in systems, in applying information in a way that's going to bring about a certain result. And this is where uni is lacking. This is where PubMed really won't help you too much, again, because there's so many different things that you see. But this is where having access to a mentor, someone in the industry that has done it and repeatedly, is very valuable. And, the thing about us in Clean Health and our courses is, yes, we have all the scientific knowledge. Every course we put out has 600 plus references that have gone into compiling that certification. But we also have had access to some of the greatest minds in the industry and learned from them directly. And we've had access to hundreds and thousands of clients that have been through our doors, that we've worked with, that we've tested methods and systems on. So we've been down the road. We know what it actually takes to apply this information in a way that's going to bring about a desired result. And I think that's what's really valuable. It's having the information in a systematic way, and especially the beginner trainer, someone who's just starting out, having systems that they can follow, to take that thinking, that decision-making process out of it. And then as they become more experienced with it as a trainer, that's when they start to take those systems and mold them and turn them into their own. But it's very hard to come and start doing that out of the back.
And one of the things, prior to becoming a master coach for Clean Health, I took all of the available online courses that you guys had at the time. This was about like 2 years ago. It kind of just was the first few level 1 and 2 of nutrition. And one of the things that I noticed a lot, and this is very unbiased, I hope everyone listening can trust me on this one, it was that type of way that the education was presented, but also systems. That was the biggest thing, because I took the NASM certification that is required for most gym facilities to be a PT here in the US. But it was kind of like that uni type of study where I just had the education there and I was like, all right, I kind of know the science to all of this, but now what? Like, what do I do with that? And I found myself really actually absorbing the information when I started taking all of the supplemental courses that I did through Clean Health, and just being able to visually see it, to go through all of the resources. I even went above and beyond whenever the citations were there to kind of go through all of those.
You check the
Yeah, to go
citations?
through all of those as well too, because I wanted to, if there was something I wanted to learn more about, that was kind of where I went to get the more extensive review on. But it really does help elevate the toolkit of knowledge that you have. But like anything, you can read textbook after textbook, but there's a difference between just reading it and knowing the knowledge, but absorbing it and being able to apply it.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that, like, it also comes down to what type of, courses that you are taking and how you're applying them. You can have all of this information, but what if you're not using it at all, right?
Well, that's the thing. The thing you have to realize is with our courses specifically, those courses were first designed internally. So when I first joined Clean Health and I started developing the curriculum, it wasn't taught externally to external trainers. It was for our group of internal trainers. What can they do to take a client from point A to point B? What systems do they need in place? What skills do they need to learn? So everything came with that in mind. It all came from like really practical oriented. And then as we, wanted to launch the certification or the certifications globally so that trainers across the world can have access to these, then it became more about, okay, how do we now pad this up with science to show that what we're teaching works and why it works? And to be honest, or to be quite frank, not everything in the beginning we were teaching actually was scientifically backed. We actually had to find the hard way. A lot of the stuff we were taking from our mentors as gospel, there was no scientific evidence to support it, and there was even scientific evidence to the contrary to that. So we had to go back and refine then the system based on the science. But the way it started was from that very practical, what can a trainer do, not just giving them a bunch of theory and just confusing them, because of a lot of trainers, especially coming out of the blue, will just get really confused if you just bombard them with information.
And we're going to talk specifically now about the new certification that is going to be launched, which is the Level 3 Performance Nutrition Certification. And I want to learn more about...
I think that one might be launched.
Is it
already.
Really? Okay, so it is live already. So
I think that one's launched.
Awesome.
So I think Level 3 PPT.
Oh, awesome. So now tell us the difference between, the PNC certification through Clean Health versus some other certifications that are on the market, and what trainers can receive as a benefit from taking 1, 2, and 3 through Clean Health, and what 3 is specifically about.
So Level 1, I think, which is what you may have done. I'm not sure if you've done Level 2. Is the most
I've done the most up-to-date ones, but now I have to go do 3 since it's launched.
Okay, so you've done Level 2 as well. So you can probably, you'll understand Level 1's very basic, very foundational knowledge. It teaches you the systems. It goes into a bit of science behind why these systems work. But it's more just to give the trainer the knowledge they need to go out and write, individualized dietary plan for a client. That's really the nuts and bolts of the Level 1. And especially if they're using that course in conjunction with our software, the iNutrition, we're able to actually secure dietary insurance cover for trainers. At the present, that's available in Australia, and then we're working on extending that coverage globally. So for starters, that's the only short nutrition course that gives you the ability to go out and legally prescribe diet plans. If you show that, you understand the content, and then you have a risk management tool like the iNutrition Pro that you can manage the clients with, it allows you to write nutrition plans. Now, as we start going deeper into Level 2, Level 3, we started going into more advanced topics. Level 2 specifically, we start going a bit into gut health and digestion. We start going into more advanced nutritional principles like metabolic adaptation, nutrition periodization, comp prep, so peaking for physique shows. So we start going a little bit more specialized, a little bit more in depth. And then Level 3, this is where we go really down the path of individualization. Okay, so Level 3 is the most in depth out of all these certifications that we do, and it's a prerequisite that you would have done Level 1 and 2 to get to that point, to even understand what's being presented. Because if you just sat Level 3 right out of the bat, you would literally be scratching your head and what am I reading? But it is that next level of individualizing your coaching service and your client's nutrition. And one of the central focal points of the level 3 is methylation that we talk about. Now, for people that don't know, methylation is basically a process which happens in the body. And to give you an appreciation of how important it is, basically methylation is the process of attaching a methyl group, could be to an enzyme, to a protein, to a neurotransmitter, or even to your DNA. And that changes how that chemical behaves. Okay. Now, to give you an appreciation of how important methylation is, that process happens about 1 billion times per second in every cell in your body.
Wow, fascinating.
That cycle's constantly repeating. Now, because of different genetics, some people are less efficient. They have a slowed down methylation cycle. So they're what we call hypomethylated or undermethylated. Some people have an overactive methylation cycle. And the reason is because there's some downstream pathways that help, for example, synthesize creatine. If there's an impairment in those pathways, you get left over with too much methyl and you become over-methylated. Now, neither of those is ideal because, as we said, methyl, for the most part, when we attach a methyl group to something, we turn it on or we turn it off. Usually we turn it off. So if you have too little methyl going around, you're not able to switch off critical processes in the body that you need to, or if you have too much running around, you're switching off, turning on or turning off shit that you don't want to turn on or turn off. So you got to think of methylation kind of like the Goldilocks principle. You want the right amount, not too much or too little. Now, because of people's individual, efficiency with respect to how well they methylate, certain people that are under-methylated will do well if you support their methylation pathway. And as we said, every system in the body, from detoxification to neurotransmitters to immune system, is affected by methylation. So if you improve their methylation, every system will improve. And then other people that have over-methylation, if you slow down their methylation cycle a bit, that would help them improve, because basically what you're doing is you're balancing out their biochemistry. The problem is, and this is one of the central teachings of the level 3 certification, is because of this bio-individuality, if you give something to one person that can make them better, that protocol can actually make another person worse. So, for example, if you give something to an under-methylator to improve their methylation and they feel better, that same protocol could actually make an over-methylated person worse, because it tips them over even further out of balance to where they should be. And for this, to understand that, this is where we start delving in depth into more blood work and lab analysis, because without doing the testing, you don't really know. And this is why up until this point, we keep, for example, supplementation very basic, because if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what's going on with people's bloods, you're better off just keeping things really basic, because it's actually easier to make someone worse than to make them better. It's only if you have a picture, you know what's going on with their bloods or their labs, then you can start making a little bit more, very specific recommendations around what supplements may help them. And we got to tread a fine line here in terms of operating within our scope of practice. But the way we approach it is we don't say to people, take this to improve that. So it's not a diagnosing or treatment of medical condition. We basically say, this is your biochemistry. Let's see how we can optimize your biochemistry. If you're deficient, for example, in methyl or zinc or magnesium or any other nutrients, let's fix your biochemistry. Let's get you nutritionally balanced. That's the way we get around it. So we're not trying to treat disease. We're trying to help people optimize or restore their biochemistry. And that's really the central point of the level 3s. How do we look at the different biochemical markers and how do we restore a person's biochemistry? But one of the most important things there is the methylation.
A quick question about, so with this certification, now we're getting into deeper and deeper details of information about, things that we could apply for our clients. Do you know, what would be your recommendation for, aspiring trainers who are completing 1, 2, and 3 about using those skills and that knowledge to specific clients? Is there a client group that you may be like, maybe this is not the right time to implement this? Or, when sometimes we focus on the little itty bitty details and then we forget the grand scope, which would be,
Well, that's a really good point. You always want to move the big rocks first. And one of the problems a lot of trainers run into, and look, we've all been guilty of this. I've been guilty of it myself. Dane's been guilty of it. sometimes we tend to focus on the
Yes,
minus.
that's what I was
You know, we tend to major in the minus. So you always got to move the big rocks first, take care of that. But once you've taken care of all the basics, okay, and you know the client's adhering to the plan properly, they're following it, then either A, if the client is not showing the type of progress they want to show, or you know, you're working with a client that just wants to optimize their health as much as they can, then this is that next level where you go.
Awesome.
You know?
Yeah.
But
And what I was going to say is like at the sometimes you see trainers overwhelm themselves and the client. And of course, if you have a Gen Pop client who has never done anything like tracking nutrition, following a
100%.
program, it could be very overwhelming. So you have to know how to read the client,
We actually,
you know, before applying those.
I specifically caution around that exact thing in the certification when it comes to bloods. Because a lot of people, they've just spent a few $1,000s possibly in working with you. And then you're going to say, okay, let's maybe spend a few more $100, get all these bloods, and you're making them jump through hoops before they've even started. Sometimes get the most out of the least, you know? And one of the ways you can get around this is we have in the iNutrition Pro software, but also we teach this in the level as far back as the level 1 PNC, is the readiness to change questionnaire, which is a simple questionnaire that looks at how willing and ready a client is to change across different areas, to make, you know, significant modifications to their diet, to track their food, to take nutritional supplements, to engage in meditation and other life practices, to exercise regularly. And what you'll see is everyone's different. Like some people are more than happy to pump themselves full of supplements, but when it comes to tracking their food, they're gonna struggle there because their schedule. Where you have other people that are the exact opposite. You know, they may be very adverse to taking supplements. They don't want to take anything, but they're happy to track their food and commit to that. And likewise with blood work, some people right out of the bat, they're really into it. They want to find out if there's anything wrong, anything that can fix or optimize, let's go. I'm all down for it. So for those clients, go ahead. But then there's some clients that right out of the bat, as you said, it will be too much and it will overwhelm them. So you got to pick your battles with that kind of thing. It's by no means necessary or prerequisite that every single client that comes through the door, you got to pump them. And look, we've been guilty of this before. Clean Health, when we were operating probably like 6-7 years ago, there was a point where every client that would walk through the door would literally get a sheet with like, go do hundreds of dollars worth of blood work before you even start. And as I said, as you said as well, some clients that they may work well for that, or that may work well for them. But for some people, it's just going to overwhelm them and it's just going to discourage them more than anything else.
And I definitely don't think that there's no benefit of taking this course even if you don't have clients that are there yet, because you never know when that type of information and that next level of coaching is going to be necessary. And your goal is to get your client out of mastering the basics, and then you can start implementing more and more layers to optimize their overall health and
Absolutely. 100%. Because a problem a lot of trainers run into is, and this is one of the problems I have with a lot of the courses that are out there that just focus so much on energy balance. And a lot of the influencers right now are just pushing that one, agenda of it's all about energy balance. And look, at the end of the day, yes, everything comes back down to energy balance. You can't negate that. But, you know, if your metabolism is not functioning optimally, you have to create a lot more aggressive deficit to get the same, or a lot more. You have to lower calories a lot more to create the same energy deficit. If you can have someone's metabolism operating healthily, you can still be in a deficit consuming a lot more calories. So this is where, if the only tool you have is creating an energy deficit and focusing on that, or the only tool you really have is cutting calories. But then if you have other tools, if a client plateaus, well, what are some ways we can look at optimizing their health and their biochemistry so we don't have to take them to such extreme and unsustainable low calories? Then that gives you an advantage over the trainer that all they can do is just drop calories more.
Now let's talk about some topics, give our listeners even more insight about the recent research that you've done for the level 3 certification about endocrinology and how our hormones can actually impact our body composition. You touched base on it a little bit, but can you give us a little bit more insight on the type of research that was done going into the course about that?
What specifically do you want to know?
Well, let's talk about, for example, the question of hormones, right? You see that on social, trainers see that. Some trainers really focus on hormones. Some of them, like you said, are more general and focus on the energy balance stuff. Well, let's answer the question of how can hormones actually impact our body composition? Can you give us a little brief on that without giving us too much, right?
Yeah,
We want to make
absolutely.
sure that you guys are going and taking this course to learn that information yourself.
Oh, and look, there's no way we can give too much in the span of an hour. There's nothing I say today can give away too much. It's still worth your while to go do the course. But look, for a fact, hormones have an impact on your physiology. So, for example, take two people. One person's testosterone levels hit rock bottom, their thyroid levels have plummeted, and their leptin level. And you take another person that has a healthy testosterone level and healthy thyroid level, and suppose they could weigh the same, carry the same amount of lean mass. So according to any equation that you take, they would be able to eat the same amount and lose weight. Yet we know that one person will have an easy time losing weight and the other person will have a very difficult time to lose weight if they lose weight at all. And one of the reasons we know, and there's a lot of research here coming from competitors, that post-competition, one of the things that happen is competitors are much more prone to gaining fat mass as opposed to lean mass. So, we talk about how anabolic you are after a show, but really, how many times have you seen someone just blow out and gain a ton of muscle after a show?
I did that my first show. Guilty. I'm so guilty. First show, I had no control after and just blew up.
So it happens very common. I've seen people put as much as 15 kilos on, or what's that, like 35, 40 pounds in the span of a few weeks following their show. So the body in that state is literally primed to gain fat. So what's happening is your testosterone levels have plummeted. That's why it's going to be very hard to put muscle on. Your thyroid levels and your metabolism have plummeted. Your fat storage enzymes are upregulated. So your body, like a sponge, is preparing itself to soak up any excess energy in the fat cells because your body has just perceived that you've gone through like an extreme bout of famine. And it wants to be able to better defend against that next bout of famine. And it's going to basically hold on to whatever energy reserves it can, so that next time it's better adapt to dealing with that kind of assault that you place on it.
Yeah.
And that's why people just put on a ton of fat following the show. And this is why the approach that you take to make sure that your hormone levels stay within certain reasonable level is important. Now, what's the thing where I can see a lot of people getting or having a problem with this whole hormonal hypothesis is that what you do is going to have a greater impact on your hormones. So it's the approach that you take will have a greater impact on your hormones than the other way around. Your hormones kind of respond to the intervention that you're following. So, for example, if you do very restrictive dieting and you lose a lot of weight really quickly, your hormone levels will tank a lot quicker than if you take a more modest or moderate approach. So your hormones are more or less controlled by what you do. So that just still illustrates the point, though. It's important to take a sensible approach to preserve your hormone levels from going to those extremely depleted, and things like having females lose their menstrual cycle, for example. The number of females I work with, that one of the things we try to do with them is restore their menstrual cycle, because they've been on too low calories for too long. They've lost their menstrual cycle. That's not good for a female, especially at a young age. They lose their menstrual cycle. They're going to be exposing themselves to higher risk of osteoporosis than for the rest of their life. That once they hit their 30s will be almost impossible to reverse if they spend the majority of their 20s, without their menstrual cycle because of ridiculous and restrictive dieting. So from that standpoint, the hormones do matter. We want to preserve good hormonal health to know that things are still operating efficiently, even if that takes us a little bit longer in our approach in order to achieve that.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we tend to forget is, it hasn't been that long period of time where we've had such an abundance to food. And our bodies are good at adapting. And, sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not. And when you are underfeeding yourself, you have very much so negative adaptations. And I see this a lot. I work with predominantly women, and, most of them come with chronic undereating, and they don't understand that, sometimes you have to push aside that goal of aesthetics and being lean and whatever else is going on for your goals, and really prioritize your actual health. And what that requires is making sure that you are having the right approach, sustainable approach, having something that's, prioritizing your health, not just what you want to look like. And that's one thing as a coach, you have to really be pressing and pushing the importance of certain hormones, especially when it comes to like the women we work with, men too.
The other one, that hormone that gets a really bad rep these days. You can't even mention it without getting slammed on social media. Is insulin.
Yes, that word gets
they come out with a whole insulin boogeyman. The problem is, okay, if you consume the same energy intake, insulin may not have an impact on weight loss. But what the studies show, for example, is if you have insulin resistance, if someone has insulin resistance, because insulin is actually a satiety hormone, right? And if you have insulin resistance, the brain has insulin resistance, doesn't get the satiety signal. So what they found was people with insulin resistance are likely to overeat 75 to 80% more after a high GI versus a low GI meal. So from that standpoint, managing your blood sugar is very important because it helps manage your appetite throughout the day. You're less likely to overeat. The other thing that can happen too is, if your blood sugar levels rise really rapidly because you trigger a large insulin response and then they tank and you become hypoglycemic, are you going to be more energetic or are you going to be less energetic? You're going to be less. So you probably move around less too. So insulin will have then an indirect impact on your energy expenditure because it's going to make you eat more to try to bring your blood sugar levels back up. You're going to move less because you're going to become more lethargic. And indirectly, because through energy expenditure, it may cause certain people to gain more weight by not managing their insulin levels properly. So it has more of an impact on your physiology, and then that affects your, energy expenditure and your food intake.
And as a coach, you can take this information and, depending on the clients you're working with, you don't have to necessarily explain every single thing to them to the T unless they're ready for it, right? Because sometimes you don't want to bombard someone who doesn't understand anything and throw around all these random hormones and things that you're looking at, and they feel so overwhelmed just because that makes you seem, well-versed or well-educated on that. You can use all of this information to make recommendations for the best for the client.
You're right. There's definitely a fine line with that. I do find, at least a lot of the clientele that I tend to work with, they like knowing and understanding. And I think that empowers people and creates more buy-ins. It's when someone knows why something works, it gives them more buy-in. At the same time, like we said before, you want to make sure you're taking care of the big rocks first and you're not just sweating the minors. And the other thing I've seen a lot of trainers do in the past is kind of use certain things and bloods as an excuse for why their clients aren't getting results. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to implant in your client's head, or you're not getting results because of this.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of what I was going.
You want to always you want to be building up your clients, because there's a thing called Pygmalion effect, which
I haven't. What is that?
For those of you that haven't heard of, it's basically Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion was a teacher. And what he found was if the teacher believed in his students or their students, the students performed better. Whereas if a teacher didn't believe in their students, they would perform worse. So it's very important as a coach that you believe in your clients and you don't make excuses for them and you don't give them excuses to start making.
Of course.
You want to empower them. And this is where sometimes, again, starting to sweat the small details too much can start to become a hindrance. So there is that fine line of educating your clients, making them aware, but, at the same time, really still focusing on the big things that will make the greatest difference.
Yeah, because I see that.
So I find myself kind of in the middle. I'm not really at either extreme.
I find that sometimes, with some of my clients that come in with like thyroid issues, PCOS, things like endometriosis, that they get diagnosed by their doctor. They have no explanation.
And that becomes their identity. And now they're the person with that.
They're stuck with what their diagnosis is, and that's the reason why they cannot reach their optimal health, which is like and that is the exact thing that's keeping them stuck there. That identity is exactly what's keeping them stuck there, and we talk about that actually in the PNC level 3. We have an advanced behavioral
health coaching module, where we discuss that exact
and that's
thing.
why I think that this course would be very beneficial when it comes to having clients like that, and knowing how to navigate the approach to health and wellness, because although they are not that diagnosis, those are going to be things that can be improved through simple things like their approach to nutrition and their actual health and wellness lifestyle, that even though they might not understand the science to it and the backing behind it, at least you can provide them some sort of guidance that can hopefully get them out of that rut of being labeled by that diagnosis and stuck there.
Absolutely. So they need to like acknowledge that it's there, the condition exists, but not give it any more strength than they need to, and make that their identity. Because if they start labeling themselves as the person who can't lose weight because I have a thyroid problem, then basically the strongest human driver is the need to stay congruent with your identity. And they will in essence, to stay congruent or to remain congruent with their identity, they will sabotage themselves from getting the goal they want, because that's their identity. Now think about it. The identity of the person that can't lose weight will not ever let you lose weight. It will never let you. It will keep sabotaging you. So the only way that you will actually lose weight is break through that identity. That's why the identity level work, that deep identity level work, is so important.
And I agree with that. Now, you also looked into neurotransmitters. What would be your top 3 for regulating dopamine? So let's talk a little bit about that.
I've taken Clean Health collectively, we've taken an interest in neurotransmitters for a long time, because since Poliquin, one of the core of his, what he attributed to his success in working with clients or athletes was basically training them according to their personality type. Okay, and then what he did is he looked at the Braverman assessment, which is a neurotyping assessment, which looks at the 4 main neurotransmitters, which is dopamine, acetylcholine, GABA, and serotonin, and sort of looks at which is your dominant neurotransmitter and which neurotransmitter you potentially have deficiencies in. And what he found was certain people, for example, if someone was naturally high in dopamine, that's going to be the person who's going to be your alpha male, someone who's very driven, motivated, really likes to smash themselves, and they respond really well to high intensity. Then you had like your acetylcholine type, which would be the person who's very witty, very quick thinkers, very much about the most cutting edge methodology, and then you had your balance type, which would be someone who's very stable. They like routine, they like consistency, they like more volume, but they burn out from too much high intensity. So that we found that extremely interesting. We've learned, we've done courses with Charles learning about that. Then later, Christian Tibito also sort of advanced that concept. He launched his own course on neurotyping. So we had Christian over, hosted a seminar with him at Clean Health. That's when we had the gym still. And I found that even, he kind of escalated to another level. So I wanted to see if we can even go further with neurotransmitters and look at from a biochemical and even like epigenetic level, what controls the neurotransmitters. And one of the central things to that is actually that we spoke about was methylation.
Gotcha.
So methylation, because look, you can't argue the fact that different people have very distinct personality traits that make them who they are, and then we know some people naturally tend to be more chilled and laid back. We know then we have the people that are like those A-type personalities that are go. The interesting thing about neurotransmitters, though, is they tend to operate on a bell curve.
Gotcha.
So let's say dopamine is the molecule of energy and motivation. So that's if your dopamine is operating on that peak level. Now, if you start tipping over, too high level of dopamine can start giving you anxiety and can lead to basically choking and freezing and forgetting everything you ever known. So you can have too much of a good thing. And where it gets interesting is there's certain enzymes that are involved in the clearance of our neurotransmitters, in the synthesis and the clearance. And some people inherently, they have a harder time clearing their stress hormones like dopamine, norepinephrine. So in other words, these people have a hard time switching off the stress response. Yeah. And the problem is if we keep the stress response turned on for too long, that stress response becomes maladaptive. So what we look at in the level 3 with regard to neurotransmitter is what are the factors that contribute to someone having maybe potentially too high or too low levels of neurotransmitters? What are the enzymes and pathways? And how can we balance out these people to correct that, to bring them within the optimal level where they want to be? Because what's interesting is you see why some people perform really well under pressure, whereas others choke under pressure. See, what they've actually found is people that choke under pressure naturally have higher levels of dopamine at base. So they tend to be quite switched on, quite intelligent. But if you put too much on their plate and you tip them over, they will choke because of that. And as we said, they have a hard time. Once they turn that stress response, they have a hard time turning it off. And I've seen this with a lot of clients in the past that are super eager. They want to go to the gym. They want to smash themselves. But after a few weeks of smashing themselves, they feel like absolute crap. Now, the reason for that is because if you're constantly spiking dopamine and norepinephrine, what starts to happen is after a while, your beta adrenergic receptors will downregulate to accommodate that higher level. And eventually you will crash. That's what happens. You crash. So when people talk about adrenal fatigue, for example, and you know how in the medical community they say it's not really a proper condition, it's not recognized. The reason is because the diagnosis that they use for it is incorrect. So the theory behind adrenal fatigue is that, if you're constantly spiking cortisol or noradrenaline, you eventually deplete the adrenals of their raw material and you start showing symptoms of low noradrenaline, low cortisol. That doesn't actually happen because when we test someone that has all the symptoms of adrenal fatigue, typically you see their cortisol or noradrenaline levels are normal or elevated. So that's why that theory has been disproved by the medical community. But if you look at, there's a lot of good research on overtraining studies. What happens is those receptors, the receptors that respond to adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, they downregulate. Think of it like insulin resistance. When you're insulin resistant, you need more insulin to get the same effect. Same thing happens with our beta adrenergic and dopaminergic receptors. They downregulate, they desensitize when you're chronically exposed to high levels of these chemicals. The same way as when you take drugs, you take cocaine or you take MDMA or some drug, you saturate your brain, the receptors with those chemicals. Those receptors respond by downregulating. And the person crashes, and that's not good. And that's why some people, with some clients, you actually need to learn. The art is not in pushing them more, but learning how to hold them back, because you want to keep them from crashing. But there's also nutritional interventions that you can take that can help manage the dopamine, serotonin levels, norepinephrine, all the neurotransmitters. So, for example, if we look at methylation, which we spoke of earlier. So what happens when we have a neurotransmitter and we shoot that neurotransmitter out into the synapse, which is between where the two nerves are, not all the neurotransmitter makes it to the opposite nerve. A lot of it gets sucked back up by what's called reuptake transporters. So, for example, if you look at the antidepressant medication, which is SSRIs, that stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what that drug or class of drugs does is they block the reuptake transporters. So more serotonin is left around to bind with the postsynaptic neuron and to have an effect. Problem is, when you affect all these neurotransmitter systems, they don't work in isolation, they work in unity. So when you affect one system without affecting the others, you start running into side effects. So typically you see people on antidepressants, some of the side effects makes them lethargic, demotivated, gaining weight, because they're affecting some of the other systems. When we do this through methylation, we can affect the ratio of these reuptake transporters naturally, because one thing methylation does is when we attach methyl to the DNA, histone tails, the DNA actually closes up and releases less of certain proteins. So that's one way we control genetic expression, which is called epigenetics. Epigenetics means above the gene. And there's a really prominent area of research in the last 10 or so years, because we're now finding out that previously we thought 99% of our DNA was just junk DNA. Now we're actually finding it's dormant DNA that can be triggered to be turned on or off depending on how that gene interacts with the environment. So what happens if you improve someone's method, when someone's under methylated, for example, they tend to have low dopamine, low serotonin, And that's because they have too much of these reuptake transporters going around sucking up their dopamine, serotonin. Well, instead of taking SSRI, if you improve their methylation, you will naturally reduce the expression of those reuptake transporters. So now you have more dopamine, more serotonin left to float around in the
That's so fascinating, and I'm excited to delve into this course given all of these topics that are going to be covered, because at the end of the day, the way I approach health and wellness is trying my best to do what I can to control my health and wellness and what I have control over, such as, the foods that I'm eating, the habits that I have, the way I move my body, all of these things that we incorporate in our lifestyle.
Your emotions, probably the most important one out of everything is your emotions.
And we tend to always look, I feel as though, in the medical field, everything is very overprescribed. Oh, you have an issue, let's just put that Band-Aid on top of it instead of delving down into why is this happening, right? And that's just what I see from my experience and through my clients. It's like they go into
You're 100%.
Yeah, you go into it.
That's the way the medical model works. You see it with COVID. Let's just get you injected with a vaccine. Not that I'm against the vaccine in any way, but there's one. My friend published a paper on it last year. Found that 4 out of 5 hospitalizations from COVID are overweight.
And that's one of the biggest things that we have a problem in our hands as personal trainers and coaches, is that we are fighting a bigger problem, which especially here in the United States, the percentage population that is obese is continuing to rise. And it's a type of issue that's kind of hard to talk about, but it's our duty as, we're the prevention, right? We're here to prevent you from getting there or help bring you back down to a healthy body fat and state of life, right? So I'm excited to delve into this course, and I hope that everybody listening is encouraged to, and don't be intimidated by the level of science, right?
It'll be a very, very eye-opening course to a lot of people and trainers, because there's really not that I know of. There's nothing else out there to the level of the detail that we go into the PNC level 3. So I highly recommend to trainers to really check out the course, because it will give them a real shift, a paradigm shift in how they look at the things.
And like anything, if you're struggling to actually absorb the information, you could always go back into it. It's very it's not just here's the textbook, read it. I love the fact that a lot of the courses online for Clean Health have, your video descriptions, you have the visuals of everything. You have the text underneath, you have your resources.
We always try to make it practical. We always want to have a practical, whatever we're teaching, there needs to be some sort of practical application to it, That's really important.
I'm super excited for that. And I will be giving everybody the 411 on how I feel about the course after I take it. I'm going to actually start that probably this week now that it's live. Thank you for letting me know that. Now, to end off this podcast episode, we do this with every guest. What would be your 3 top takeaways for aspiring PTs, current PTs that listen to our podcast that you'd like to give them?
What will be the top 3 takeaways from our session?
Yeah, or any type of takeaways, advice that you would give to any PTs that are listening.
Look, I guess a lot of it depends on the PT and where they are in their journey. But I think one of the things that we spoke about was definitely that if you get into this field, make sure you're getting in it for the right reasons, that this is your passion. You want to make sure you stay ahead of the curve. So like we said, clients these days, they are very clued in. So you do need to make sure you do what you can to stay ahead of the curve. And if you're a trainer that's looking to, because a lot of I have a few private mentoring clients that are trainers, and they're looking into getting to educating other trainers. It's even more important then as a trainer that you need to stay ahead of the curve. And the other thing I would probably say is make sure you don't, because I've seen this happen with some high-level trainers, don't lose sight of your own training and your own goals. It's really why a lot of us got into this field in the first place. And, these days, I personally don't need to be in the gym training clients one-on-one. I'm full-time with Clean Health, writing content. I do a couple of online clients. But the reason I choose to get in the gym at least a couple of days a week, see half days, see some clients, is just to stay in the game, to stay sharp, to hone my skills working with clients, and also just training myself, because this is everything that I learned. That's my playground, is where I can apply it and play around with it. So, and I have seen, unfortunately, it happens to some trainers where they get so caught up in training their clients and they get so caught up in their business and marketing and all these other stuff, they actually forget to take time to go and to train themselves, and they get out of shape, and it sounds almost like ridiculous that I would be saying something like that would be one of my top advice for trainers, but it does happen.
Yeah, and you want to be able to apply everything you learned for yourself, and you teach your clients to yourself, right? Your goal is to optimize your health, and that doesn't mean being, competition stage lean 365. Obviously, health and fitness looks different for everybody, but make sure that you don't neglect yourself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. That's my takeaway from today's session.
That's very good. That's a good saying.
I'm so excited for you guys
or fit your own mask first before you fit somebody else's.
Exactly. I'm so excited to hear your guys' feedback after taking level 3 certification. You got to hear a lot of insight from our head of research and development here at Clean Health. If you guys have any questions for us, make sure you follow Clean Health's Instagram, Stefan's Instagram, and my own. And we hope to have you guys tuning in for our next episode. Thank you guys so much.